right, testing the audio. Yep, it's working great. All right, hey, how are you guys doing today? There's actually nobody currently viewing. Well, hopefully people tune in a minute. I apologize for not doing one of these live lectures last week. We had a small family emergency here that we had to take care of, but everything's fine now. Uh, so let's begin. All right. I guess since people may tune in a minute, I'll wait to announce the big thing. Periodically, I'd like to start with some news from the world of biology. And so here you can see a map, and everybody is scared right now about the coronavirus. And so I just wanted to talk about that for a little bit. Is this the virus that finally does in humanity? I don't think so. Uh, now, in the event that it's not that catastrophic, why are we interested in this? Well, let's talk about whether or not it is catastrophic first. Uh, there have been how many now? 17,000 cases of the virus, 500 deaths, which makes it slightly more fatal or a little more fatal than the flu. Now, you may think the flu's nothing to laugh at, but actually, 8,000 people died from the flu last year. 8,000. I believe that number's for just the U.S. Anyway, um, but is this going to wipe out humanity? And the answer is no. What it will do is potentially cause a lot of deaths that otherwise could have been avoidable if we can contain this virus. So SARS came out of China a number of years ago. That was a serious respiratory um, disease. It was communicable. It was infectious, and they successfully quarantined it in China and essentially eliminated it very quickly. The response was incredible. With the coronavirus, the disease is actually spreading more quickly than SARS did. It's more infectious than SARS was, and it has left China. There have been a number of cases here in the U.S. I know in Chicago and Wisconsin there have been cases. So let's zoom in here. It all started in Wuhan, China, here, okay, which is in, where'd it go? It's in Hubei province. I saw Hubei on the map earlier. Oh well. Wuhan is in Hubei province. We'll just say that. So when you hear in the news them talking about these two terms, Wuhan is the city, Hubei is the province. And we zoom out, and it's a fair distance away from some of the major cities like Shanghai, Beijing, um, but it's managed to spread out of this area to the larger Chinese cities, now to Hong Kong. I believe there's been one death in Hong Kong, and then from there, of course, to the United States and other countries as well. So I asked the question earlier, is this the one that's going to wipe out humanity? And the answer is probably not. So why are we concerned about it? Well, we can reduce the number of deaths from infectious diseases. All right. The other thing is we don't want this to become like a new human disease. So there are a list of diseases that humans can get. On that list are things like the flu, rhinovirus, which is responsible for the cold, chicken pox, etc. There's a list of diseases humans can get, and we don't want to add one more name to that list, one more thing that we have to look out for seasonally. The flu is, even though a lot of people treat it like it's a joke, it is somewhat serious. As I said, it is responsible for 8,000 deaths annually, roughly. And that's with our vaccination efforts. Without our vaccination efforts, the death toll would be much higher. And that's a scenario we're looking at with the coronavirus because there's no vaccine for it yet. So the ultimate hope here is to contain it and wipe it out, but it has spread, making that difficult. All right, so talk about a couple more things. Where did it come from? It seems like it likely originated in bats and then made the jump to humans. Whenever we see a new disease pop up in the human populations, likely it originally came from an animal. It's a disease that existed in another animal, almost always another mammal, and it, something changed in it. There was a mutation that allowed it to make the jump to humans, that allowed it to live and thrive in humans where before it couldn't. We were able to eliminate it, or it just simply could not reproduce in humans. All right, good. Don't fall for these three myths. Did the coronavirus come from Corona beer? It may sound far fetched, but there's been a spike in the number of searches for coronavirus beer. The fact is, it did not come from Corona beer. As we just discussed, it came from bats. Now we skip on down. Myth number one: pets can catch and spread the coronavirus. Most diseases do not readily jump from one species to the next. If a disease, if an infectious agent like a virus, a fungus, or a bacterium is not able to already thrive in another species, it's very rare for it to make that jump suddenly. So if you caught coronavirus, your pet's probably not going to get it, and you're almost definitely never going to get coronavirus from your pets. This jump, which occurred from bats to humans, it occurred once, but that once was enough to initiate the spread of the disease. It's still an exceedingly rare event. Myth number two: drinking miracle mineral solution will protect you from the coronavirus. This stuff is just more snake oil. Myth three: antibiotics can prevent or treat the coronavirus. And of course, that's not true because viruses are unaffected by antibiotics. You need an antiviral medication to stop viral infections, and most antivirals don't work if you take them more than 2 days after the infection starts. Uh, and that can even be hard to tell when the infection starts because you may be asymptomatic for a while. You may not have any symptoms for a while. All right, so moving on. Good. So if you really want to freak yourself out and track this thing, uh, all of the major news agencies, CNN, NBC, have live updates. In China, they've closed a lot of Starbucks. Looks like Yum Brands is closing about 30% of its stores in China. Um, Yum Brands, of course, you're from Louisville. You know that they are responsible for KFC, Taco Bell, Long John Silver's, Pizza Hut. Uh, good. What else? Oh, yeah, Chinese Disneyland closed. Yeah, so they are taking this seriously. They are doing everything they can. One of the problems is that in Wuhan, which is the epicenter of this outbreak, there's a shortage of surgical masks and latex gloves. Now, your normal latex gloves will actually not stop the spread of the virus. The virus itself is small enough to kind of slip between kind of the pores of the glove, and so you actually need uh, very special dense latex gloves to prevent the spread of a virus like this. And that's part of the problem here. It's been able to spread because the hospitals did not have the appropriate protective equipment to stop it. All right, so I see we've got two viewers now. Hey guys. Um, so let's go ahead and talk about the important stuff here. Here I am. You can see in the fourth learning module, week four, energy. Chapter 6 covers photosynthesis, and Chapter 7 covers metabolism, that is, actually, I should say cellular respiration, which is where cells break down glucose for energy. Photosynthesis is, of course, the exact opposite, where energy is being harvested by plants, energy that comes from the sun, and it's going to be used to turn um, CO2 into glucose. So the exact opposite reaction here. For the video links, um, YouTube for some reason was not working when I tried to set this up, so I just had to make a direct link to it. You just click it and it goes to the YouTube page.
I remember.
All right, probably a little easier to watch that way. It's not up yet. I will finish it tonight and post it here. But our first exam is coming up. I will post it at the end of week 4, and it'll be available to you as soon as it's up, and then it'll be due Sunday night. You can take it anytime between now and then. I would recommend actually that you put it off for just a little bit because you're going to be allowed to take practice attempts at it to kind of get a feel for it and practice some of the questions. Okay, now the questions you get are going to be random. Hey, Darian. Hi, I'm just looking up now. Uh, the questions you get are going to be random. So you won't get the same questions every time. If you take it with a friend, um, don't, but you guys won't get the same questions when you both take it. All right, so moving on, we can go here. I've already pulled it up in the student preview. Again, it's not fully done. There are just questions in here from chapter 1. That's what it'll look like. I click continue, and it asks me a question about experimental design. So scientists were studying temperature selection among pregnant big brown bats. What would be the test group in this experiment? So not the control, which group is the test group? Okay. All right. So you can click pregnant bats. They are the test group. Or are they? All right, now here's a diagram, just asking you to label the parts. So label the image below to review the flow of energy and the cycling chemicals in a terrestrial ecosystem. Place your cursor on these boxes for hints. So up here, the sun, I don't suppose that's solar energy. All right. So here we have the level where we've got plants. Now, are they consumers, producers, or decomposers? All right, so they are, of course, producers. All right. Then we can just click through. All right. And anyway, you guys get it. There'll be, I think, roughly 50 questions when we're done. All right. And again, as soon as we finish the lecture tonight, I'll get back to working on that, and then we'll have it up late tonight. Don't stay up. It'll probably be late. I would expect to go ahead and make your first practice attempt tomorrow. I'm going to click save and exit. Exit now. All right, it's not giving me any feedback because I'm now in the instructor view. So let's jump into tonight's lecture. We talked before about macromolecules and a little bit about nutrition. Then we're going to talk some more about nutrition tonight. Okay. And this lecture, this PowerPoint that I have here, it's long. It's written for another class, a higher level class, and so I'm going to skip some things like biochemistry. There's biochemistry in it. I'm going to skip over that. You don't have to worry about it. There's going to be um, just a lot of stuff that we either don't have time for or really shouldn't be getting into, just because it's a much higher level. All right. Hey, Cassie, welcome. All right. Um, and for anybody tuning in now, if you didn't hear the talk about the upcoming exam, be sure to watch this video over, go back to the beginning and listen to that part. All right, so the nutrients are these are chemicals that come from the environment that organisms need for survival. Yes, that's right, chemicals. You hear a lot of people bad mouthing chemicals, and I do it myself. I'm guilty of it. Uh, my family likes pasteurized processed cheese product, commonly known as American cheese, like Kraft singles. I, I don't like it myself. And so I'll with disgust say, ugh, it's nothing but chemicals. But of course, all things are chemicals. I am chemicals. You are chemicals. The food I eat is chemicals. The salad made with fresh bean sprouts is chemicals. All right, so just got to be careful about which ones you're bringing in, right? Anyway, so nutrients are used to supply energy that fuel metabolic processes and for building the blocks that produce the molecules the body needs. So basically, we can use them to make the macromolecules we talked about before, the lipids, the carbohydrates, the proteins. If you eat a food that has a lot of protein in it, we're actually going to not ingest that protein. We're going to break it down into amino acids, and then we can uh, bring it into the body. We can bring it in through the intestine. All right, I misused the word ingest there. I just have to point that out because I don't want to lead anybody the wrong way. The word ingest means to eat. So, of course, we will eat protein, but we're going to break it down and then absorb it through the intestine. All right. Tell you what, I'm going to turn off notifications right now. Sorry. Because there's a lot of them popping up. Okay, so back to it. There are two major nutrient classes. You've got your macronutrients and your micronutrients. Macro means large, micro means small. And when we say large or small here, macro or micro, what we're talking about is the quantity that you need. And so your macronutrients are the carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. These are things that we need a lot of. Micronutrients are required in small amounts. We only need micrograms of the stuff per day. And so this will include vitamins and minerals. Now, essential nutrients are nutrients that the body cannot synthesize. And so you may have heard of essential amino acids. There are amino acids that we can't produce. And so you'll have to bring those into your diet. Now, if you eat an animal based diet, you eat meat, eggs, cheese, then you don't really need to worry about that. Animal foods all contain all of the essential amino acids. If you eat a vegetarian or vegan diet, this is something you might have to think about. If you eat a varied enough diet, if you have enough variety in your diet, you don't have to worry too much about it. But um, if you go on a vegan diet where you eat nothing but bean sprouts, right? You eat nothing but bean sprouts. You have a very limited vegan diet, then you will probably be deficient in a number of amino acids. Certain foods, though, contain some of the essential amino acids, and other foods may contain others. For instance, peanut butter contains some of the essential amino acids, and wheat bread contains different essential amino acids. And if you eat a peanut butter sandwich on wheat bread, then you have all of your essential amino acids. It really is that simple. All right. So moving on. Oh, I should say, with all the talk about essential amino acids, there are also essential fatty acids. There are lipids that we can't synthesize and have to bring into the diet. So moving on, we've got carbohydrates. Of course, you know these are organic compounds that contain carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. And it includes all of the sugars and starches, and also, by the way, glycogen, which is found in meat. Now, it's not found in large quantities in meat, but of course, it's there. All right, so the energy that's held in the chemical bonds between the carbons and the carbohydrates, we use that energy to power cellular processes. In other words, we turn that energy into ATP, and then ATP will be used to power a lot of our enzymes. All right, so carbohydrates are brought in a variety of forms. We can have complex carbohydrates. Excuse me, I am very sorry. We can have complex carbohydrates called polysaccharides. The word poly means many, saccharide means sugar. So this is a large molecule made up of many sugars. All right. And those include starch and glycogen. And starch and glycogen are both big branching molecules made up of glucose. Lots of repeating glucose units make up starch and glycogen. So they're similar in that they're both entirely made out of glucose and that they're large branching molecules. The difference is structural, they have slightly different shapes. And also, starch is made by plants. When plants choose to store carbohydrates, they're going to store it in the form of starch. And when animals store carbohydrates, they're going to store it in the form of glycogen. Okay, so you do it too. In your skeletal muscle, that is in your muscle, the muscles that move your body, they are going to produce glycogen to store sugars for later. The liver also stores glycogen, okay, stores sugar in the form of glycogen. And then whenever your blood sugar drops, say it's been 3 hours since your last meal, your blood sugar is going to be pretty low. Your body will start to break down glycogen so it can release glucose from the liver back into the bloodstream and bring your blood sugar back up. Um, yeah. Now, skeletal muscle, that is the muscles that move your body, uh, I say they also contain glycogen. They also make and store glycogen, but when they break it down, they don't share it with the rest of the body. When muscle breaks down glycogen, it keeps the sugars for its own purposes. So those are complex carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates are actually not that bad for you. You should consume them in limited quantities. Um, you should consume them in limited quantities, but you hear a lot of people kind of scrunch their nose up and go, "Ew, starch! There's so much starch in this food," and it's like if you um, had a choice of getting 100 calories worth of energy from starch or 100 calories worth of energy from simple sugars like table sugar, you'd be better off with the starch. The starch holds water in the gut, helps you feel full longer. It's slower to digest, so starch is better for you than simple sugars. Simple sugars are really bad for you. You may also hear them called sometimes refined sugars, um, especially the high fructose corn syrup, which is basically liquid sugar. So if you had a choice between 100 calories of potato and 100 calories of cola, you'd be better off with the potato. Anyway, next up we have simple carbohydrates. Now, of course, we do need some simple carbohydrates, but in the modern world, it's just so easy to get too much. It's too easy to get too much of it. And the simple carbohydrates, I think we mentioned before, are the disaccharides and the monosaccharides. Di means two, mono means one. And so the disaccharides are two sugars that are linked together. And examples include milk sugar, cane sugar, beet sugar, and molasses. Milk sugar, I believe we talked about, that is one glucose and one galactose molecule chemically bound together. Monosaccharides are the single sugars that come from honey and fruits. So you've got things like glucose, fructose. Um, yeah. Now, table sugar, the kind you might see on the table at a diner, you put it into your coffee, or if you're baking a cake or something, you might get a cup of sugar, that white crystal stuff. Uh, that is called sucrose. And sucrose is a disaccharide which has one fructose and one glucose molecule bound together. All right. And so we actually can't bring into the body, we can't absorb from the gut polysaccharides. They're too big. But also disaccharides are too big. We can't absorb them. All right. So in the mouth, we have saliva, and saliva contains an enzyme that's going to start to break down the polysaccharides. Uh, and then in the intestine, we're going to break down the polysaccharides further and the disaccharides. We're going to break polysaccharides down into monosaccharides and disaccharides in the intestine. And then finally, we break all the disaccharides down into monosaccharides and we can absorb the monosaccharides into our gut. And so you can see right away one key difference. If you are drinking a drink that is made up or eating a food that is made up almost entirely of monosaccharides, you're going to be able to absorb that very quickly. It enters the bloodstream, causes your blood sugar to spike, and then drop precipitously afterward. The polysaccharides, again, they take a lot longer to break down. They're slower digesting. They help you feel full and satiated a lot longer. I believe in the last nutrition lecture I mentioned cellulose. It's a complex carbohydrate. It's found in plants. It's one of the most abundant, uh, probably the most abundant saccharide on the planet. Um, but we can't break it down in our gut. If you can invent that pill, uh, that's $1 million idea. That pill that breaks down cellulose. All right, so here you can see we have some simple sugars here. We've got fructose on the left, galactose on the right. In the center is glucose. Now, we can absorb galactose and glucose from the gut, but we can't use fructose and galactose. We can't break them down for energy. What we have to do before we can break them down for energy is convert them to glucose. Okay? We don't need to get into the biochemistry of it, but just we can convert fructose and galactose to glucose, and in fact, we have to in order to use them for energy. All right. All right. So what do we do with excess sugar? Well, you can do two things. Um, this is kind of an overview of carbohydrates. We can bring into the body complex carbohydrates as well as disaccharides and the monosaccharide. Actually, maltose. Yeah, maltose. Yeah. Well, that's a. I can't remember if that's a disaccharide or monosaccharide. I want to say a monosaccharide. Or maybe it's two glucose molecules bound together. Anyway, doesn't matter. We bring them in. In order to absorb them again, we have to convert them to glucose, which we absorb. Well, we can bring in glucose and fructose, but then in the body we have to convert them to glucose to use for energy. Excess glucose in the blood can be turned into glycogen. Okay, we can store it in glycogen, which is again a complex carbohydrate made up of glucose subunits, and we store that in the liver and in muscle. We can also um, convert it to fat. We can break it down partially and then begin to start building fat out of it. Okay, and so that's how uh, sweet things make you fat. Of course, fat things will make you fat too, but sweet things will make you fat because we're able to convert that glucose to fat. All right. So it's recommended that you take in about 125 to 175 grams of carbohydrates per day. Now, I know some people are doing this keto diet, and the people I talk to are aiming for under 50 grams of carbohydrates a day. And in reality, they're wishing to be much lower than that. It's kind of hard to do with most of the foods that are readily available, but you can get special keto foods for that. But you don't have to go that low. You don't have to go down below 50 grams per day to live a healthy lifestyle or to even lose weight. It's recommended you take about 125 to 175 grams of carbs per day. Of course, you guys all made your Fitbit accounts, and you'll get a personalized number there. Um, the average American diet, and here's the problem with sugar: the average American diet in reality contains about 200 to 300 grams per day. We on average Americans bring in around 200 to 300 grams per day, and you can see that's that's roughly double the number that we were given for our recommendation. We're eating too much sugar and we're eating too many carbohydrates, and the majority of those carbohydrates are simple sugars found in energy drinks, found in cola, And drinking it, of course, is the worst way to do it because you bring it in so quickly without even realizing you've done it. There is no minimum requirement that is known for carbohydrates. Of course, on the ketogenic diet, people attempt to live off of fats for energy instead of carbohydrates. Humans evolved to utilize carbohydrates for energy. You can live off of fats, um, but it's maybe not the best idea. The brain runs exclusively on glucose. And we should also say ketone bodies, but it prefers glucose. It does not want ketone bodies, it wants glucose. All right, so that kind of gives us a segue into lipids. So, lipids, these are organic compounds, and fatty acids are made up of hydrogen and carbon only. Now, they can have head groups that are made up of other things, like in a triglycerol. Animals, or triglycerides, sorry, triglycerides are made by animals. They're a type of fat made by animals. And they have at their head a glycerol molecule, which is actually an alcohol, and then three fatty acids attached. All right. So lipids can be used for a number of things. We can make, of course, our plasma membranes out of them. We can use them as signaling molecules. Um, Sort of a local hormone called eicosanoids. You don't have to look that up. You don't have to remember it. Just fun bar trivia for you. We can actually use lipids to make hormone-like molecules called eicosanoids. Anyway, cholesterol is a lipid, and we do use cholesterol to stabilize plasma membranes in cells, and we also use it to make the steroid hormones. So the hormones that are secreted by the adrenal cortex, which includes your cortisol and your aldosterone. Those are steroids that are originally made out of cholesterol. We modify cholesterol to make those steroid hormones. The adrenal cortex, I should say, also produces testosterone, which is a steroid hormone. In the case of men, uh, a, a very small portion of our total testosterone is made by the adrenal cortex. The majority of it is made by the testes. For women, though, who do not have testes, 100% of the testosterone they have in their blood comes from the adrenal cortex. More fun bar trivia there. Where do women get testosterone? Exclusively the adrenal cortex. Moving on. Oh, hey, fun fact: starch is plant-based. Yeah, right, exactly. Thank you, Cassie. Yeah, and I was too. And starch. I'm not saying go out and eat tons of starch to anybody, but if you have a choice between, yeah, the complex carbohydrates and simple sugars, always go for the complex carbohydrates. Um, it's kind of like Cookie Monster had to learn. Cookies are a sometimes food. Starch is a sometimes macronutrient. Uh, Ironically, cookies contain a lot of simple sugar. Anyway, thank you, Cassie. Um, so the most common dietary lipids are triglycerides we mentioned, which are made up of glycerol and fatty acids. So you have saturated fats, unsaturated fats, and you have trans fats. Cholesterol, it's included in this list. It's not a fat, it's a different kind of lipid. Saturated fats are going to be abundant in animal products, and so you can get these from meat, eggs, milk, also lard if you cook with that. Hopefully, nobody eats it straight. Uh, you're going to find a lot of saturated fats there. Animals tend to make saturated fats. Unsaturated fats come from plant sources. You've got your seeds, your nuts, and your plant oils like vegetable oil, olive oil, sunflower seed oil, all those, canola oil. Anyway, I can go on. All contain unsaturated fats. An interesting thing about saturated and unsaturated fats, We won't go into the biochemistry of it, but they have slightly different shapes. Saturated fats tend to stand like a straight line. Unsaturated fats usually have a kink that makes them kind of veer off down the line. And so the saturated fats stack better, and they're going to be found in solids. So you'll find them in lard, right? Butter. It's going to be solid at room temperature. Unsaturated fats are going to be liquid at room temperature. So those are going to be like your vegetable oil, your olive oil. They are liquid at room temperature because the unsaturated fats don't stack very well. Now you've got trans fats next up. Trans fats were a big thing a couple years ago. People loved them because they were vegetable fats, unsaturated fats, that we chemically modified to make them act like saturated fats. And so you could get basically you could make like a margarine out of uh, olive oil, right? You could make olive oil behave like it was a saturated fat. And so these were used in a lot of industrial processed foods, right? The factories that pre-process your foods used a lot of trans fats. Some restaurants use them as well. I think they've been banned in a lot of places now. So what's the problem with trans fats? Trans fats behave, I'm sorry, they look like saturated fats. They act like that. But then when our enzymes in the cells go to break them down, the enzymes don't know how to, and so they started accumulating as toxic byproducts. Now, please bear with me just one second. I've got to find the charging cable for my headset. I think it's dying. All right, we're back. We should be fine. Last on the list here is cholesterol. And cholesterol is a lipid, but it's not a fat. Okay? The fats are made up of fatty acids, and the fatty acids are long chains of hydrocarbons, or long chains of hydrogen and carbon, I should say. Cholesterol is different. It has a different chemical structure. It is, however, not water soluble. It is water insoluble, just like the other fats. And so they share that in common. Now, cholesterol, as I said, is necessary in the body. It is used to stabilize plasma membranes and cells. It is used to make steroid hormones. It is used to make, I want to say, vitamin D. Uh, all right, so cholesterol is important in the body. Now, it's also important to remember, though, that's not licensed to go out and ingest a whole bunch of cholesterol either. Your body makes a certain amount naturally of cholesterol, and it's probably enough to get by. You probably make all the cholesterol you need. You don't necessarily need to get it in your diet. When people do eat a lot of cholesterol, the body will actually dial back how much it makes to try and compensate for that. If you continue to eat more and more cholesterol, though, especially the LDL cholesterol, that stands for low density lipoprotein, but I'm not going to ask you to remember that. Just that's what it stands for. The LDL cholesterol, especially, will build up in your arteries, forming plaques, which narrows them. And these plaques help start blood clots. They also make it easier to form blockages when another blood clot comes along. And that's a serious issue when you're talking about the coronary arteries that feed the heart. If you block one of those, you're actually going to starve the heart of blood that it needs to live, and it'll start to die, and that's what we call a heart attack. Myocardial infarction, where the tissues of the heart begin to die because blood flow to the heart itself has been blocked. And that's often caused by plaques formed mostly of LDL cholesterol. Now, uh, one more thing to know. Uh, can you guys take a second? This won't take long. I'll just pause for a second. Can you think? What do you think is the number one killer in America or the world at large? Is it coronavirus? Is it, infectious diseases, warfare, accidents, cars? Um, and because I'm asking it right here, I'm sure you've already guessed. It's cardiovascular disease. The number one killer worldwide is cardiovascular disease, largely caused by the overconsumption of foods rich in cholesterol. I may have told you guys, since we were talking about Fitbit before, not Fitbit, MyFitnessPal before. One day when I was tracking my foods, I looked to see, where I was with my nutrients for the day, and I was shocked to see that I had like four times the daily recommended allowance for cholesterol. And I thought, how did I do that? And it's really surprising to me. I don't eat a lot of cholesterol usually, and it was eggs. I had eggs for breakfast. It put me way over the mark on cholesterol, so got to watch out for that. Darian, excellent. Heart disease, yes. Cardiovascular disease, coronary artery disease, all other names for, yes, heart disease, or, well, heart disease is another name for coronary artery disease, we should say. All blockages of the coronary arteries. All right, so lipid use. Of course, we use lipids mainly for energy. The triglycerides, the fatty acids, they're going to be used for energy. We can also use lipids to make, we can use fatty acids to make, I mentioned the eicosanoids, the signaling molecules. And of course, we can use cholesterol to make steroids. Now we're going to skip a little bit here. All right, so essential fatty acids I mentioned before include linoleic acid. Linoleic acid is a fatty acid that we can't make, that we have to get in our diet. We mentioned the lipoproteins before. When you hear people talk about cholesterol, a lot of the time you hear them talk about the LDL, as we just were, also the VLDL, and the HDL. Okay, and the difference is the density of the lipoprotein. This lipoprotein is actually a bundle of protein and cholesterol and lipids. High density lipoproteins have a high protein content. Low and very low density protein lipoproteins have low protein content, higher triglyceride and cholesterol content. The VLDLs and the LDL tend to cause the formation of these plaques, which narrow the blood vessels and help generate blood clots. HDLs actually can help. HDLs can help lower the number of LDLs and VLDLs. All right. So it's worth mentioning that the liver produces fatty acids, also produces um, cholesterol. Um, yeah. So lipid requirements vary widely from person to person. You do need some lipids in your diet, but not exactly clear what the minimum is. The American Heart Association recommends that you not exceed 30% of your total daily calories from fat. And let me pull out the MyFitnessPal app right now. So if you go to your daily log, oops, your diary, and you scroll down to the bottom and you click nutrition, that'll take you to a page where at the top it says calories, nutrients, or macros. And if you go over to the right to macros, okay, you can see what your goals are set for the macronutrients. Okay, and you can actually change your targets, but fats here are in red on the chart. Just make sure that you're not exceeding 30% when you look at your macros. All right, so moving on, we've got proteins. what the heck are proteins, right? Like, you think someone tells you need more protein in your diet, you think, where am I going to get it? And most people are going to think meat. Of course, you can go with meat, very high in protein content. Um, right, but there are other sources. So you can get that from your milks, your cheeses, yogurts. Of course, meat's going to be higher. You can also get it from soy. As far as plant sources go, soy is incredibly high in protein, although not as high as meat. Soy is also a complete protein. So we were talking earlier about essential amino acids, and complete protein sources are foods that have all of the amino acids, all of the essential amino acids. So meat, milk, cheese, eggs, all the animal products, they are all complete proteins. In the plant world, it's a little harder to find complete proteins, but quinoa is a complete protein, as is soy. A number of legumes, not all of them, but there are a number of legumes, bean-based foods uh, that are complete proteins, and one of them is soy. So you can get all of them from soy. Beans in general, pretty good sources of protein, although you'll of course get more per gram in meat. All right, so moving on, proteins can be used for energy, but actually, it's kind of difficult to use proteins for energy. They have to be broken down and broken down and broken down again, and they release roughly as much energy as glucose does, actually. But the process of breaking them down is so difficult that we couldn't power our cells minute to minute on protein alone. And of course, the brain runs exclusively on glucose, and it can accept ketones, but it doesn't want to. All right, moving on. What do we got? You can see here protein, when we eat it, it gets broken down into amino acids. Those amino acids get absorbed across the wall of the intestine into the body. Now, we actually can't absorb protein, has to be broken down in the gut and in the stomach into amino acids. All right. Now, from there, the amino acids can be used they can be converted to glucose, they can be converted to fat, or we can break them down directly for energy. But all of these biochemical processes take a long time over here. On the left, we can use amino acids, you can see, to build structural proteins, both in the cell and in tissues. We can use them to make enzymes, which do work in the cells. We can use them to make some of the hormones, actually, most of the hormones, the peptide hormones, the amine hormones. And then, of course, plasma proteins. These are the proteins found in your blood plasma. They help transport substances through the body, through the blood. All right, so protein sources we've mentioned, meats, also fish, poultry, that's birds, turkey, chicken, cheese, nuts, milk, and egg, all pretty high in protein. Legumes, these are beans and peas. They contain less protein. They're a pretty good source for vegans and vegetarians. But if you do eat meat, you'll get more from meat. You'll get enough from legumes. Just if you're looking for a high protein diet, say you're a type 2 diabetic, uh, you may be better off going with the meat, fish, poultry route. So the body needs about 20 types of amino acids. There are, I mean, depending on who you ask, there might be 20, 21, but let's go ahead and say 20. Most people agree 20 amino acids are needed by the body. 12 of them can be made by us. 12 of them can be synthesized by the body. They are non essential amino acids. The 8 that we can't make, those are the essential amino acids. Okay, those are the ones, the 8 that we can't make are the ones that we have to get in the diet. All right. All right, so whoops, did I skip one? Here we go. We mentioned complete and incomplete protein sources before. Complete proteins are, of course, the meat, milk, eggs, animal products are always going to be complete proteins. They've got all of the proteins. I'm sorry, all of the amino acids. They've got all 20. So you're fine. And in those 20, of course, are included the 8 that you need to get in your diet, the essential amino acids. Incomplete protein sources do not have adequate amounts of the amino acids. So many plant proteins are going to be incomplete. Now, if you combine two incomplete proteins, you can make a complete protein. As we said with peanut butter sandwich with wheat bread, peanut butter and wheat bread together, you have all of the amino acids. Another example is rice and beans, beans and rice. You put those two foods together, beans have some of the essential amino acids, rice has some of the essential amino acids, and the two foods together, they've got you covered. You got all 20 amino acids. These are the names of the amino acids. You don't have to memorize them, but it's just good to know that there are 20 distinct amino acids, right? There's alanine, that's one amino acid. Arginine's another one. Asparagine, aspartic acid, those are other amino acids. All right, let's keep moving. So protein requirements, your daily minimum requirement actually um, is based on body size. And so they give you this formula here about zero point 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day, or zero point 0.4 grams per pound of body weight per day. Might be a little easier to calculate here. So let's pull up a calculator. In medical science, we often talk about this mythical 70 kilogram male. All right, this guy doesn't actually exist. It's a big joke in the medical community. But let's say we're talking about a man who weighs 70 kilograms. Multiply that by zero point 0.8, and that gives us 56. This man needs 56 grams of protein per day. Now, 70 kilograms is about 154 pounds. 70 kilograms is about 154 pounds. So this guy needs about 56 grams of protein per day. Now, if you open up your MyFitnessPal app, it will actually give you a personalized, pre-calculated number for you. Most people should consume in the area of 60 to 150 grams per day. Um, it can actually be a little hard to hit these numbers sometimes. Uh, so, maybe a protein shake for breakfast might help get you started in that direction. A deficiency of protein is going to lead to tissue wasting if you're not bringing in enough to support your body's needs. You're going to see muscle begin to atrophy. You're going to see hair falling out. That's something that does sometimes happen when people go on crash diets and start exercising hardcore. Like it's like New Year's was yesterday, and I need to lose 60 pounds by this summer. So, you know, that kind of mentality. You may see hair falling out because those people are not bringing in enough protein. You'll also see a decrease in plasma osmotic pressure. Um, Plasma osmotic pressure is kind of the pull that blood has on water in the tissues. If there's a high concentration of protein in the blood, that can pull water out of the tissues. If you don't have a high enough concentration of plasma in the blood, I'm sorry, protein in the blood plasma, then you're not going to be able to pull water out of the tissues as effectively, and that's going to cause a condition called nutritional edema. Edema is a condition where fluid or water accumulates in the tissues, and you may see people looking puffy, certain parts of the body just swelling up a little bit, and that's because they're retaining water in the tissues. We call it nutritional edema because this instance of edema is caused by nutrition or a lack of protein. So, another big question when it comes to diet um, is what is a calorie, right? What is a calorie? A calorie is a unit of energy, and just off the top of my head, I can't exactly remember. It's enough energy to raise 1 liter of water by 1 degree Celsius, something like that. Um, but how do we measure calories? Well, a calorie is a measure of energy, again, and so we have this device here called a bomb calorimeter. Calorimeter. And we basically burn it. We're going to burn the food, and we can precisely measure the amount of energy released into the surrounding water. We can measure that with this thermometer, and that tells us how many calories, how many units of energy there are in the food that we're testing. All right, and so you can see here in carbohydrates and proteins, about 4.1 calories per gram of carbohydrates, about 4.1 calories per gram of proteins. So as we said, roughly the same amount of energy in both, but the biochemistry in your cell is just tuned to run on carbohydrates more quickly. All right, we burn carbohydrates for fast energy. Okay. Um, Proteins, the cell doesn't usually want to burn protein. It would like to hold on to protein. Lipids are they have about 9.5 calories per gram. So as we said before, lipids have more energy, more than twice as much energy per gram as carbohydrates do. However, it takes a lot longer to break down lipids than it does to break down carbohydrates. And so, minute to minute, we're using carbohydrates for energy. If you're going on a little jog, 15, 20 minutes jogging, then you'll be breaking down lipids for energy. Also, if you go a long time without bringing in carbohydrates, you'll begin to start breaking down the fats. The basal metabolic rate is the rate at which the body expends or uses up energy under basal conditions. Now, basal conditions is like the minimum amount of energy basically it takes to keep you alive. So you're awake, but you're at rest, and you've been fasting overnight, so you haven't eaten anything in like 8, 9 hours at least, and you're comfortable. So you're just sitting there basically existing. This is the amount of energy your body is consuming, your basal metabolic rate. So the basal metabolic rate is going to vary with your gender, your body size, body temperature, and your thyroid hormone activity. So it'll in other words be different from person to person for these reasons. Maintaining the basal metabolic rate requires the body's greatest energy expenditure. Most of what you bring in food, um, or in energy in food, supplies. Hmm, how do I phrase this? Most of it gets spent on the activities that are included in the basal metabolic rate. Everything that's necessary to keep you alive minute to minute. All right. Um, good, good, good. I think we'll finish up with body mass index here. Okay. So the body mass index is a ratio of height to weight. It is a measurement that compares your height and your weight. It's widely used in medicine and in science to um, gauge health based on weight, but it's maybe not the best measure. We can see that in a minute. So a person is classified with a BMI as being either underweight, normal weight, overweight, or obese. Underweight, normal weight, overweight, or obese. So a person who is overweight has a BMI of about 25 to 30. A person who is obese has a BMI over 30. Okay. Obesity would be better defined as an excess of adipose tissue. So the adipose tissue is the fat tissue in your body that holds on to fat. So that's really the better measure of obesity is percent body fat, not so much this ratio of height to weight. But as you can see, it gets, well, as you probably know, it gets used frequently in medicine because it's something we can calculate easily and extrapolate ideas from in papers, scientific papers. But so let's say you are 5'2", 170 pounds. Well, this says that you have a BMI of 31, which places you into the obese category. Maybe that sounds right, but maybe you're um, a professional wrestler at 5'2", just totally ripped with muscle. You could come in at 170 pounds at height 5'2" and be classified as obese, and of course you would know that someone who's ripped like a professional wrestler is not obese. It's maybe not the best measure. But for normal people, for the majority of us, it does a fine job. All right. In blue here, you can see a healthy weight at 5'2". That gentleman should probably be about 120, 130 pounds in that range. All right, so almost 1 in 3 adults in the U.S. are now obese. All right, and it's defined as 20% above desirable weight. That's having 20% more than the desirable weight as a percentage of the total body weight. Uh, so it increases your risk for type 2 diabetes, digestive disorders, heart disease, kidney failure, hypertension, stroke, and certain cancers. Now, we hear this all the time. I kind of think it's the other way around for a lot of these. I think, just this is my personal opinion, for what it's worth, which may be nothing, but it's my personal opinion that the things that make us more susceptible to hypertension and stroke, like a diet rich in, say, red meat, um, fatty, cholesterol laden foods, maybe fried chicken, some of these things, some of the less healthy meats, that kind of thing. We know those things predispose us for hypertension and stroke. I think they also predispose us for obesity. I think obesity is a symptom of our diet, just as hypertension and stroke are. I don't think these are caused by obesity. That doesn't make as much sense. Both heredity and environment can contribute to obesity. So there are conditions in your gene, well, that you can inherit in your genes that will predispose you to some degree to gain excess weight or to be underweight. Your environment also can contribute. They've done pretty cool experiments where maybe you guys have heard of the microbiome. There are multiple microbiomes, but the one we usually talk about is in the gut, in the large intestine. And it's the ecosystem there of bacteria that live in your large intestine. And we're learning more and more all the time how important they are. And just as one very brief example, they did an experiment a while back where they wondered if the bacteria in your gut might have an effect on whether or not you were overweight. And so they took these mice that were naturally overweight and some related mice that were not, and they removed bacteria from the two sets of mice. Then they gave the mice antibiotics and destroyed all the bacteria in their guts, and then swapped their bacteria. They gave the fat mouse some skinny mouse bacteria, and they gave the skinny mouse some fat mouse bacteria. And you know what happened? The fat mouse got skinny, and the skinny mouse got fat. I mean, that's just kind of crazy. That now, of course, humans are bigger, far more complex. There's a lot more going on than just our gut bacteria, but in this one limited case, they were able to show that for mice, it plays a huge role. The microbiome does. Actually, some of my research that I shared with you in week one, I'm looking at the effects of a high fat diet on mice. I'm also looking at the effects of probiotic on mice. And we were able to see in that lecture, just from some of the data I put up, that there is an effect. The probiotic in that example reduced inflammation, inflammation associated with obesity. I didn't share some of my other data with you, but I have found that, of course, the probiotic reduces weight. The probiotic, by the way, is bacteria. We're adding quote unquote good bacteria to the gut. Now, it's fair to say this bacteria is good because there are a lot of health benefits coming with it, but we don't know what all the effects are. So maybe we should be hesitant to use the word good. Uh, anyway, I figure that's good enough for today. There's not going to be a discussion board this week because we have an exam which is due Sunday night. Again, once we finish this lecture, I'm going to begin working on that. Uh, oh, excuse me, that exam, and then it'll be ready for you either late tonight or early tomorrow morning. Okay. So, do we have any questions before we go? All right. Well, thanks guys for tuning in. Hopefully, we'll have more people next week. And if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to send me a email anytime. I've been really good about getting back to people lately. All right. Thank you very much. Have a good night.